Monsignor Gino Walsh famously said, "Followers of Jesus Christ are promised two things. Your life will have meaning and you will live forever. If you get a better offer, take it." Eternal life, death, and dying have been on my mind a lot this past year since Father Bob Boulogne, the Catholic chaplain at Yale University and my closest friend, died. We had worked together for 10 years, 20 years ago, to expand Catholic life at Yale. That experience of working together allowed us to model a genuine partnership, lay-clergy collaboration, in a monumental task of consequence for the Church, for Catholic campus ministry, and for future generations of young adults. In the context of confronting his death and all that death means for the Christian believer, I recalled this story. One evening, as relatives and friends gathered in familiar pose and conversation on our porch in New Haven, Connecticut, the subject turned rather suddenly to the best way to die. The question was specific in its intensity. How would you like to experience your own death? Over bottles of wine and candlelight, we took turns articulating the pros and cons of the myriad ways any one of us might experience our own death. It was not entirely morbid. One friend was certain that dying in her sleep peacefully at the end of a long life would be the most desirable. Another suggested that she would like to die suddenly and quickly without warning, ideally after a spectacularly joyful celebration with everyone she knew and loved. Okay, that was me. Another suggested that he would prefer to have as much time as possible with the knowledge of a terminal illness in order to make amends, to thank his friends and family, and to be intentional about giving away everything he possessed. And so the conversation ensued until the oldest at the table, my father, turned to the youngest at the table, our 13-year-old daughter. "Sophie, you've been very quiet and very attentive, but you have not yet volunteered an answer. Do you have an opinion on the way you would most like to die?" Everything became still and silent. I held my breath. Too late, I wondered if she was too young for such deep, existential, distressing discourse. Perhaps she had never seriously considered the matter. Now, at the center of everyone's attention, aware that a response was being asked of her, she replied very simply, "Yes, I hope I die saving somebody else's life." None of these answers were bad answers, but only one was truly Christ-like, the child's. We cannot afford to lose this generation of Catholics, not under any circumstances. We cannot allow the Church's prophetic role in the public square and across the globe to be eroded. Both are serious and urgent concerns. Now, I have arrived here to be with you these 2 days straight from our Leadership Roundtable Summit. We are very much aligned with the planners of this conference. Our theme was From Crisis to Co-Responsibility, Creating a New Culture of Leadership. This new culture of leadership is predicated on baptismal responsibility, on co-responsibility, and on leadership as Christ-like service. A major focus for us was a panel of 5 young adults. They offered concrete practical suggestions and laid out a vision for the Church where every pastoral council, every diocesan finance council, and every board of trustees from the University of Notre Dame to a local Catholic soup kitchen in South Bend includes a minimum of 2 young adults who have been prepared, formed, oriented to ecclesiology, canon law, Catholic social teaching, and baptismal rights and responsibilities. You all are in for a treat because one of those 5, Katie Diller Gleason, will be featured at this conference in a breakout session later today. These are not easy days to be Catholic. These have not been easy years to be Catholic as we confront the twin crises of abuse and fractured trust in church leadership. I've been asked to speak today about co-responsibility for a culture of healing in the church. I won't mince words. The abuse crisis and concomitant distrust have eroded the moral authority of the church in the public square, affected the ability of the church to evangelize, destroyed the credibility of church leadership in the eyes of far too many, certainly not helped to stem young adults from leaving our faith, and placed the church's financial well-being at risk. Responding to the abuse crisis and advocating for the role of lay leadership, and frankly, especially women in the church, has been a central component of my work on behalf of the church all of my adult life from the age of 14. I was in my 20s, newly elected to the Board of Trustees of the Raskop Foundation for Catholic Activities, when in 1995 an archdiocese appealed to the Raskop Foundation for a grant of $500,000 to settle lawsuits stemming from clergy sexual abuse and to provide compensation to victim survivors. Depending on your viewpoint then or now, I was either naive or prescient. I wanted to deny the grant and help the Archbishop sell property to make recompense to the victims and to be fully transparent about what had happened. Jump forward to 2002, I was working as the Director of Development at St. Thomas More, the Catholic Chapel and Center at Yale University with Father Bob Boulogne. Proudly, we were traveling the country, meeting with prominent Yale Catholic alumni, talking about how we were elevating and celebrating Catholic intellectual discourse on Yale's campus, taking the topics of the day, illuminating them from the perspective of faith, and inviting students into rich dialogue and discourse about the role and relevance of faith. Suddenly, the topic of the day was our own church's sexual abuse crisis. Our predominantly lay board at the time did not want us to be distracted by the crisis. Their position was Father Bob and I hadn't created the crisis, weren't culpable, it had nothing to do with us, and we should simply continue to raise money for Catholic life at Yale. Father Bob and I thought that was fundamentally unfaithful. The way we saw it was that the church was our faith family, and when your family is in crisis, you do everything possible to effect healing and reconciliation. We had a moral responsibility to be part of the solution and to respond to students' questions and distress. Put another way, to do nothing is to be complicit. Resolute in our conviction, we temporarily suspended the campaign, planned and hosted a 3-day conference entitled Governance, Accountability, and the Future of the Catholic Church. 500 people attended, 30 national speakers. The material was wrenching, but everyone left hopeful, resolute that this was our church, and we are not abandoning it, but staying and calling it to greater levels of accountability, transparency, justice, and holiness. We published the proceedings of the conference, which became the touchstone for the reform movement and put St. Thomas More at Yale on the map. In 2005, Jeff Boise founded Leadership Roundtable and recruited me to be the founding executive director. We are a network of Catholic leaders from all walks of life with managerial expertise, financial acumen, and problem-solving capability. We harness this collective expertise to help church leaders respond to temporal challenges. We do not, nor have we ever, waded into doctrinal matters, but are laser-focused on helping church leaders properly care for people, facilities, and finances. We help bishops, provincials, and other church leaders solve complex temporal challenges. This means we are faithful to magisterial teaching, cognizant of ecclesiology, and everything we create and offer for the church is vetted through the lens of canon law. We are intentionally positive and laudatory. We love our church. We are partners with church leaders, not antagonists. With uncommon fidelity to purpose, we earned the trust and confidence of church leaders, particularly bishops in the U.S., which brings us to June of 2018. Suddenly, we were embroiled in a new wave of crisis, one that is not unique to the U.S., but global in nature. Following the McCarrick revelations and the Pennsylvania grand jury report, a new wave of scandal and mounting impatience was evident here at home. At Leadership Roundtable, we have spent a lot of time since then assessing what is different about this time from 2002 to today. Some observations, but I'd be interested in your own. We now have an entirely new generation of young adults hearing the graphic details for the first time. There is a cumulative effect of frustration, anger, shame, sorrow, and horror on the part of so many priests, women religious, deacons, and laity of integrity, like so many in this room who have been working on solutions for decades. The crisis of sexual abuse was expanded to include vulnerable adults. The external culture and impact of the Me Too movement is certainly a factor. If movie moguls, politicians, and CEOs no longer get a pass, why should we expect faith leaders to? And perhaps most specifically, the sense that church leaders were not held accountable for failures of commission and omission in the handling of systemic abuse of children and vulnerable adults. We are not giving up, but working diligently to respond and to be part of the solution, to be part of the healing necessary. At Leadership Roundtable, we advocate that victim survivors be part of all deliberations, solutions, and plans, and remain at the center of our collective care and concern. This is the minimum of what justice demands. Our sisters and brothers have been harmed. We owe it to them to offer everything we have to make recompense, and listening to and believing victim survivors is critically important for all of us, and it is just. Along with survivors, lay leadership is essential. Laity with exceptional managerial expertise and experience. Lay women and men of integrity and exemplary character and reputation must be enlisted to work with church leaders. Restoring Catholics' trust requires cultural change based on transparency, accountability, competency, and justice. Since 2018, especially in light of requests for help from some 50 bishops, we have worked toward recommendations and solutions in service to church leaders and efforts to restore trust. We've scanned the horizon, collated insights from many sources, convened listening sessions with cardinals, survivors, canonists, and other leaders. We've prepared an architecture for action that is a working organic document with recommendations for the short, medium, and long term. When our son and daughter were little, my husband and I told them if we ever got separated in a park, in a museum, in any public space, they should look for a mother with young children and go to her because she would keep them safe and know how to reunite us as quickly as possible. I didn't tell them to look for a cop or to look for a priest. I'm haunted by the question, where were the women at the tables of decision-making when the crisis broke in 1995 or 2002 or 2018? And how different would things have looked if mothers, if parents, had been included in leadership and decision-making? This is the most important thing I can say, and let me be very clear. It is not that women are better than men, or their parents are more judicious than those without children, or that laity are more capable than priests. It's that diversity matters. Who is at the tables of decision-making matters. We all need to solve for myopia. We are all myopic on our own or within our own narrowly defined groups. We only know what we know. We need the diversity of perspectives and experiences to be healthy and whole and wiser and more prudent. We need diversity to be good stewards, which is why women's leadership together with men matters, and no solution moving forward will be complete without the presence and authority of women. Allow me to offer a few of many insights and recommendations we have gleaned to stimulate our own discussion. Please note that these recommendations and insights are coming in many cases from discussions with bishops and cardinals and provincials themselves. This is not pitting one part of the church against another, quite the opposite. I think you will hear in this the sincerity of current church leaders to restore trust and advance a culture of justice and integrity. We look at this as twin crises, abuse and distrust. The two are interrelated, for the abuse crisis resulted from a culture of clericalism and a set of leadership and management practices that together permitted then covered up the abuse for decades. These crises offer an opportunity of transformation, however, to create a new culture of leadership through service and ethical management practices and a new partnership between laity, religious, and ordained members of the church in co-responsibility. Silence is no longer an option. We recommend and have been recommending a coordinated release of names of credibly accused priests, diocesan and religious, with concomitant financial reporting of costs associated and where the money came from. Financial accountability is a vital part of the solution moving forward here. Don't wait for attorneys general to subpoena the files. Be proactive and fully transparent. Consider creating a national registry of the 96% of priests in good standing. Monitor and update it regularly. An immense amount of work toward this has been done in this past year in particular, and I commend bishops and diocesan leaders for that hard, demanding work. Be unequivocal that bishops will no longer be exempted from the charter and will be held accountable by an independent, predominantly lay review body. We welcomed the Pope's motu proprio in this regard. Conduct a thorough review of clericalism embedded in the Code of Canon Law and commit to making changes. Supplement the John Jay study, which examined the causes and context of the sexual abuse crisis after 2002, with one that examines the misuse and abuse of power among leaders. Invest in a human resource system that includes effective selection, training, assignment, evaluation, compensation, and continuing education for both ordained and lay leaders. Reform seminary formation. Now, an entire day could be dedicated to this one topic, and I just want to commend the work that John and his colleagues here at the Center, at the Institute, have been doing with respect to this in partnership with CARA. Also, some very important insights coming out of a gathering at Boston College at the beginning of this year, in which I had the privilege of participating. I would just say that one broad theme of these discussions is integration, that seminarians should be integrated in classes with their lay counterparts, that women should be included on faculty in seminaries, and that a premium should be placed on human and relational formation. Ensure that women are in meaningful positions of leadership at every level of the church, even especially in the Roman Curia, and are at the tables of decision-making. The current pope and the two previous popes have all said this to us. We need to help them realize that dream. The twin crises of abuse and distress demand twin responses, recovery and reform. Both are necessary for healing. And when we speak about reform, we are speaking about transforming culture, which is not easy and is not quick. Moving from a clerical culture and the associated leadership and management practices to one of co-responsibility, accountability, and sound stewardship of all that has been entrusted to us. Cultural change involves changed behavior, our own individual and institutional over time. It requires systemic changes. Cultural change means a return to fundamental purposes and values, the very values the gospel enjoins us to embody. Other-centeredness, the presumption of goodness in one another, the proper care of all that has been entrusted to us, openness, honesty, compassion. And finally, cultivate mercy. People are reeling throughout our whole church. As exacting as we must be in our insistence on true accountability and positive managerial reform, we would be wise to remember to do all things in love. This is core to what it means to be a follower of Christ, and was amplified so beautifully in the first paper today. There's much more with much greater detail. You can find all manner of suggestions and ideas that are open for discussion and action on Leadership Roundtable's homepage. The bottom line is cultural change is difficult, but difficult does not mean impossible. The best advice I can offer in times of anguish, when the institutional church fails to live up to its potential or manifests ignoble qualities, clericalism, fear, secrecy, prejudice, or mediocrity, comes from my teacher and spiritual director, a beloved sister of mercy. She said, "Remember what it is you most love about the church and membership in it. Name what you love, claim what you love. It will provide ballast to allow you to navigate with fidelity and focus when you are disappointed and discouraged." I've taken this advice to heart and highly recommend the discipline. Have you thought about this? When people ask you why you are Catholic or why you stay, what do you tell them? What do you most value about our faith? My list is long and wide. I love our church's rich intellectual tradition, social justice teaching, sacramental life and imagination, mercy, the Eucharist, the primacy of conscience, prayer and transcendence, forgiveness, the preferential option for the poor and most vulnerable, the daily injunction to be Christ-like. I love that wherever there is human suffering in the world, the church is at the vanguard of providing relief, promoting justice, and advocating for peace. I am daily grateful for Pope Francis. I love that he has given us Laudato Si and that it provides people of goodwill a seminal roadmap to care for our common home and one another. And with the heartbreaking loss of my friend, Father Bob Boulogne, I am grateful more than I can say for our church's articulation of the communion of saints, the conviction of eternal life, the fact that love doesn't end with death. I submit that there are as many personally held and valued reasons why one loves the church as there are members of the church. Be clear often about what it is you most love and value, for that will sustain you in these times of challenge and difficulty. My best answer, however, at its heart is simple. I love the church, have dedicated my life vocationally to serving the church, and will never give up on the church because of one thing: you. Women and men, ordained, religious, and lay all over the world, like you in this room, who are committed to effecting healing and reconciliation, to providing justice for victims, survivors. You in this room who have dedicated yourselves to Catholic social teaching and action, responding to the needs of a broken world as a lived and active expression of your faith in Jesus Christ. You are a reason for my hope, and the hope of all who know you. Never underestimate that. Some additional reasons for hope. The opportunity to respond to whatever challenges are before us. Allow for, and in fact demand, a new culture of leadership and management, and a new relationship between laity, religious, and ordained. And we are all invited to be part of this by virtue of our baptism. Our baptism confers upon us responsibility. Working together is to be co-responsible. If there is any grace in the abuse crisis, it is that it roused laity out of our lethargy. This is our church. Healing is needed. To do nothing is to be complicit. One example of a piece of the broad mosaic of co-responsibility for healing is the following. Fatica, this consortium of foundations and donors philanthropically supporting the church, have just created a safeguarding pledge for their members, for foundations and donors, which all of its members and all Catholic donors are invited to sign. It commits to helping raise consciousness about safeguarding among all grantees, including international grantees, and providing resources through a collaboration with Presidium to help grantees implement safeguarding measures and protocols. Just one example, but an intriguing one, everyone can do something. And although it is impolitic for those of us who belong to and work on behalf of the church to say this, permit me to do so anyway. The Dallas Charter and the response to the revelations of sexual abuse in 2002 yielded insignificant protections for children. One could argue that the very safest place for a child to be right now, anywhere in the world, is in the Catholic Church in the US. Safeguarding protocols were put into place. Hundreds of thousands of people working in the church or even serving as volunteers have been trained. Consciousness and awareness has been raised. Reports of abuse have plummeted. New cases are increasingly rare. Where I see hope is in acknowledging that the crisis of 2002 issued in some very important substantive changes that serve to protect children. My hope is that the crisis of 2018 will issue in the same effective changes in the area of reform and cultural change of management and leadership. I see hope in the recognition, finally, that this is a global problem for a global church demanding a global response. Pope Francis issued new global norms, and we are working closely with Father Hans Zollner, the director of the Center for Child Protection in Rome, on advancing those norms. If we go the extra mile, we will, as a church, as part of our penance, be in a position to offer the rest of the world valuable insights and strategies to end the scourge of sexual abuse of children wherever it occurs. We are the leader in this space. I feel hopeful whenever a person decides to remain in the church and exercises baptismal responsibility to hold us to higher levels of ethics, excellence, accountability, and holiness. That and nothing short of that is our task at hand. I find hope in the roster of speakers and panelists featured in this convening: priests, women religious, lay leaders, bishops. I find hope in your example, your presence here, the acknowledgement that it is as much our responsibility to effect positive managerial and cultural change as anyone's, to effect justice for victim survivors, healing and reconciliation for the church. And I find hope in the conviction of our newest saint, John Henry Newman, who said, "To live is to change, and to be perfect is to have changed often." In closing, the church is the instrument through which the Catholic faith is transmitted to nearly 1.3 billion people. The church is also the largest global humanitarian network in the world, with enormous potential and therefore responsibility to address human suffering and complex global challenges. Let's be the church we yearn to see, a more relevant and hospitable church to young adults, a more joyful church, a church of integrity, ethics, trust, justice, and openness, a safe environment for the most vulnerable, a church worthy of profound generosity, a church at the forefront of justice, peace, and charity, a church that avails itself of the talents of all of its members, acknowledges the gifts and competencies of women, and utilizes those talents in meaningful leadership, a church that properly cares for all that has been entrusted to it and responds courageously and confidently to the potential at hand, a church whose members take responsibility for effecting healing and reconciliation together. A church the world needs because the world needs healing, solace, peace, hope, mercy, generosity, and above all, the light and love of Christ. Thank you. Thank you. At this point, I wish I could say that I'm not actually Carrie Robinson, but I'm reading Carrie Robinson's remarks, and I won't take questions. No, but too many of you are my friends, so I know you would call that bluff. So I think at this point we have time for any questions, comments, rebuttals, ideas of your own. Please.
Carrie, thank you for that excellent presentation. Actually, two questions, but most of us bishops, or a good number of us bishops, became bishops after 2002. And I became a bishop in 2004. So we came in, the charter was already there. So a lot of time, a lot of effort in our dioceses to implement the charter, to be faithful to it. And one of the things that obviously was missing from the charter was a lack of, a way for bishops to be held accountable. Or if there was misconduct or abuse by a bishop, what would a victim do? Also holding bishops accountable for truly being faithful to the charter. So that was obviously, we've learned, a big problem. And I guess it was the mcgrath case and others that brought that especially to the fore in 2018. At the same time, as we've gone through these years since 2002, one of the other things I think that's, and you pointed it out, the steep decline in the number of cases that are that have taken place. Most of the cases I've received as a bishop are cases from many years ago. Oftentimes they're deceased priests, etc. I think one of the other things that was problematic is there wasn't a public list of the priest abusers. For example, in my situation, anytime I had to remove a priest, I did make it public, but I never made public the ones that were removed before I was bishop, which in hindsight, I wish I had. I mean, I have in the last 2 years, but most dioceses did not do that. So I think that's another thing that we've learned was very important, especially for victims. So where are we at now? I think the Pennsylvania grand jury report, unfortunately, I think the way a lot of the public received that is thinking that what is contained there is still going on. And that was unfortunate, but there was a political motivation, behind that by the Attorney General of Pennsylvania. But reading it is terrible. I mean, it's appalling, as anyone here who's read it sees how evil really this was. And of course, the negligence of bishops, the moving of priests, all of that. Unfortunately, a lot of people were thinking this is still going on. So I think that in Peter Steinfeld's article, was it in New York Times?
Commonweal.
It was in Commonweal. So that helped, but still I think a lot of people kind of have that idea, which is very frustrating, you can imagine, for us, for bishops in particular. But I want to ask you about two challenges that I see, that I've experienced, especially since 2018. One would be with our priests and the fear of unjust accusations. And bishops get a lot of criticism that we're not being, maybe fair to the priests and their rights of defense. So that's a big challenge, and there's canonical things involved, and we have to deal with that. The other thing is laity who get very angry at bishops when we remove a priest who we know through our diocesan review board, very carefully removing a priest with a credible allegation. And then that lack of trust is there on the other side. So you don't remove a priest, and that's awful, that's terrible. But then you do remove one, and there's lack of trust there as well. So I really appreciate what you said about the role of the laity. I don't know how we could deal with this. Certainly the Diocesan Review Board, for me, is of the greatest help. But even on the level of diocesan staff, women and men who assist in this whole area, which I really find, I don't know what I'd do without their help. So I want to thank you for highlighting that. But I just wanted to point out those two challenges that I find very frustrating. Removing a priest. I have one priest I removed with 6 victims. 6 victims. And, people are still angry that he's been removed. And it's that lack of trust. They believe he's innocent. And we can't go out as a bishop and give all the details, because, that's problematic legally, I guess, that we say, well, this is what we, So anyhow, I just wanted to bring up those 2 challenges. Maybe you have some thoughts on those.
Other than empathy, those are very real challenges that are happening in every diocese. And we have a divided church just as we have a divided country. And this reflects a little bit of it. It's hard when you know your pastor and believe in your pastor, and your bishop removes your pastor because the bishop is doing the right thing in consultation with evaluation and expertise from laity and others who have reviewed the case. But we still have to do the right thing. We still have to do the right thing and take the heat for it. It breaks my heart every day to work with priests of such breathtaking pastoral skill and goodness and integrity who say to me, I am one false accusation of being immediately taken off the job, and I've dedicated my entire life to my priesthood. These are anguishing realities we are facing. But I believe in truth. I believe in the diversity of competent lay, religious, and ordained experts evaluating these cases and shoring up leaders who are doing the right and courageous thing despite taking the concomitant heat and distress. So thank you. Please. Or there are microphones being passed around.
Carrie, thank you. I'd like to raise up a question, first a comment and then a question, that deals with seminary formation. We'll hear later, I believe tomorrow evening, from 2 of my wonderful colleagues, Colleen Moore, director of the ECHO program, and Monsignor Heinz, Michael Heinz, who was formerly the director of the MDiv program and now at Mount St. Mary's. Marvelous colleagues who own every word of what you said, as do I. We have models existing already that, without in any way being self-referential, I'd like to hold up. And that is the model of programs like the Master of Divinity program here at a university context, not a freestanding seminary, where the Congregation of Holy Cross allows for all of its seminarians to be educated side by side in all of their academic and pastoral formation, of which I'm a part. I'm the director of formation and field education in this program.
Fantastic, thank you.
They are collaborators in every sense of the word. They are co-responsible and, more importantly, taught to be co-responsible.
Excellent.
Their human and spiritual formation is within the context of the Congregation of Holy Cross, whom I also uphold and applaud. Their pastoral and intellectual or academic formation, theological formation, is within this graduate degree program that we have at the University of Notre Dame. My question is, and yes, I'm sure we'll be talking about this in the future, but I'd love to hear your perspective. How do we cultivate what is happening and should be continuing to happen, not just around the world, but here as well. We continue to evaluate and assess how we can do it better. Where is the hope within seminaries that there will be this kind of attention to the formation of future priests in the church and the formation of lay ecclesial ministers in every way co-responsible for the future of the church and the mission of the church? I would appreciate your comments, and on behalf, again, behalf of the faithful women of Jerusalem and all of their co-workers and all of their apostolic collaborators and the disciples of the church, I thank you.
I think you said it beautifully. I can't do a better job than how you laid that out, other than this observation. I don't think we as a church writ large tell our positive stories and our hopeful experiences loud enough, far enough, and often enough. Nor do I think we say thank you enough to bishops who do the right thing against, a lot of grief, or examples like this. Maybe that could be part of our task, is to figure out ways where there are convenings, regional, national, global, where we highlight what is working really well and beautifully, not to trumpet our particular initiative or even our own role in it, but to celebrate insights that have been tried creatively, faithfully, tested, evaluated, and are bearing good fruit. Because if it's working here, it can work in other parts of our church. So thank you for that example. Okay. Okay, you have the microphone.
I got the microphone. Yeah, following up on Bishop Rhodes, I'm one of the few bishops left who was at the Dallas Charter voting in 2002. And what I recall of that situation, it was very much a reaction to a crisis. And reflecting back on it, it didn't seem like there was much of a response out of the values of our faith, going in it proactively, looking at, well, what do we believe, what do we cherish, and how do we address the situation as opposed to just legally reacting. That said, having gone through, I'm one of the 19 dioceses in the country that's gone through bankruptcy, I understand where the tension between reaction and response, but I think we're getting better at responding. I think we're getting much better at response because we're getting ahead of the curve, but it's taken a while to address that cultural dynamic that you spoke about. I think one of the things that, the ways that we address that is through addressing the whole issue of clericalism. And I would probably add hierarchicalism. I read a paper about that recently. That's you and me. Sean, you too. At my own diocese, every year I write a Lenten letter to the ordained ministers, priests, and deacons. This year's the topic was clericalism. And one thing I asked all the priests to do is, even if it's not their experience or practice, to take one day a week on Thursday to spend an hour for the Blessed Sacrament and read chapters 13 through 17 of John's Gospel, concentrating on the 13 on washing feet.
Fabulous.
Because but that applies to all of us, to learning how to wash feet. But I think we get beyond the entitlement and power over others and that work. So, but the question I have is, what do you see the tension between the reaction to situations and response out of values and what you do in leadership?
That's a tough question. We were speaking about this at the break a little bit, that one of the things we have to remember is that people are at different phases of their experience of the crisis. And We can't, those of us who have been working on this for so long can't afford to be fatigued or jaded or let's just move on, because we're always in the midst of people for whom this is brand new. And so I love the injunction to set in one's calendar intentional, deep prayer time for all of us. It's how we can know that our intentions are sound, and to always do an examination of conscience. Are our intentions sound? It allows us to empty ourselves of all that stands between God and us so that we can be an instrument for what God intends. And it gives us the reservoir to receive each person, the person who is reacting in anger, justifiable anger, with the kind of grace that comes from our faith. None of it's easy. None of it is easy. I don't know how we are able to do this without faith and prayer. Just one little side note, I feel like I need to be an evangelizer for this experience, but Leadership Roundtable had 2 days of very intense thoughts and deliberations and analysis and creative solutions on all manner of managerial challenges. But 4 different times in our 2 days together, we took the whole assembly and we had 2 minutes of silence. And it made a palpable difference in what we were courageous enough to speak about at our tables and in our willingness to enter into deep, compassionate listening to others. So you're on to a great thing with prayer, but it's not easy. I just think we can't afford to not try to see Christ in every person all the time and enter that relationship with humility. Was there? Yes.
First of all, I just want to say thank you to the bishops and priests who are here, because it's a sign of, I think, encouragement, certainly for myself anyway. Mm-hmm. And we appreciate, I think many of us appreciate the position the bishops are in. They're between a rock and a hard place. You know, no matter what you do, somebody's not going to like it. But I believe there was someone who came before you who experienced the same thing, I believe, in Nazareth. But I'm at a seminary, and I believe, this is my perception, and clarify it if it's off, please. There's quite a difference between seminary of religious orders and seminary of diocesans. And there is a lack of integration with laity at the diocesan seminary that seems to naturally happen for religious orders. And I know our rector would love to do some integration with laity because we run parallel programs. The faculty teach in our master's programs for the laity that are exactly the same as the classes the seminarians are taking, but we can't take them together. And the reason we're given is that bishops will pull their men out if we have combined classes. So we certainly understand and encourage and value and support the specific identity of the priest in our ecclesial life. But it becomes sort of a stressor, if you will, I think, for the rector and for others. You know, how do we walk that? How do we walk that? And because we don't want to close either. And that's really what it boils down to, is we'd have to close if too many bishops pull their men out. So it's just a distinction. It's not really a question. It's just that there is a distinction, it seems, between the diocesan seminary and the religious order seminary, because we're so dependent on bishops.
Thank you for raising that.
And that's not a criticism.
Yeah, thank you for raising that. It's all the more reason why candid, charitable discussions, soulful conversations about the realities we are facing are important. Please.
First, Carrie, I really want to thank you. It was, I could tell that it came from your heart, and I could tell your passion, and I really appreciate that when you're presenting in front of this many people. I have a hard time doing it myself. I'm wondering if you'd be able to say a little bit more about this term that you used several times of, decision-making as our baptismal co-responsibility. Certainly, everyone who's baptized is co-responsible for the mission of the church in some degree, but this decision-making seems like it's for the leaders, whether or not that's strictly hierarchical or in collaboration, that's to be determined. But specifically, what do you envision or imagine for decision-making from lay people? Number one, and the second part of that is, what is more universal in our role as royal priests to participate in this healing that must happen if we're not all going to be making decisions?
Great. Let me just see if you will allow me to address the decision-making question through the lens of the role of women in the church. Okay? Oh, we're out of time. No. I'm just kidding. For 11 years, spanning 3 popes, a small group of women who represented their own Catholic foundations, their own families' foundations, philanthropically supporting the Catholic Church's apostolates and ministries all over the globe. This small group of women and I, each of whom was representing our family philanthropy, had the incredible privilege of going to the Holy See 2 times a year for 11 years. And when we were there, we would spend a week at a time, and we would meet with the presidents and prefects of the pontifical councils and congregations. So the cardinals who form the inner circle to the Pope, who head the various dicasteries. And our only purpose, which they knew in inviting us, was to talk about the role of women in the church and opportunities to elevate women to positions of leadership and at the tables of decision-making. Now, we never went over there demanding or even bringing up the subject of women's ordination. They always brought it up, interestingly, but we never did, because we had one thesis, which is the following. When a young Catholic woman looks at especially from the West, looks at the landscape of her professional life, she knows that she can reach the highest levels of leadership and decision-making in any field or sector that she chooses. And when that same woman discerns a vocation of service to the church she loves, her experience is that often there are unnecessary, gratuitous limitations placed on the exercise of her full set of skills and competencies. And this is inherently frustrating, especially for natural leaders who live out of a sense of vocation and responsibility. So we wanted to raise up some 47 concrete ideas, none of which violate magisterial teaching, none of which contradict canon law, none of this ignore ecclesiology, all of which we could implement right now, except for a failure of habit and a failure of imagination. Now, what's an example? We would say to each of the cardinals, how many women serve on your international advisory body to this dicastery? We would ask, how many women are in senior positions of leadership in the dicastery? And then we would measure it. We would say, we're back, and any progress? Now, I don't want to blame anyone in this. This is, all of us have a responsibility to make some of these important cultural changes. I came to appreciate that the church happens to be located in Italy and has been influenced by Italian labor law. It is not so easy to just make room for women in senior positions in the Curia, especially when the Pope wants to kind of restructure the way the Curia operates to make it more aligned with the needs of the church today. So there are distinct challenges, but none of that can be an excuse that we accept, because when we look from a secular perspective at how women in positions of meaningful leadership on international corporations, the boards of international corporations, those companies that increase the percentage of women serving on their boards have a dramatic increase for return to the investor, to the shareholder. Women physicians are far less likely to be sued for malpractice than their male counterparts. Even the US military, another deferential hierarchy that was predominantly run by men, the 4-star and 3-star generals I know admit to the tangible practical benefit to the military and to its culture when women were admitted into the ranks of 3 and 4-star, et cetera. So why, if we love our church and value its mission beyond return for the shareholder, why wouldn't we want to do everything possible to position the church to flourish? And that is what I mean about decision making.
Let's take one more quickly, and then we're going to have to get to our break.
Hi, that was a great talk. Thank you. My name's Patricia Dugan, and I'm from Philadelphia, so I know all about grand jury reports. But I'm a canon lawyer and a civil lawyer, and I'm chairing a commission for the Canon Law Society on the possibility of a national penal tribunal. So as canon lawyers, we're trying to do better, and I just wanted to make you aware of that. But it gets very negative. I've done more than 100 cases as an advocate for priests, victims, abusers, survivors. It gets you down, and I can only imagine the priest's reaction. So our report will come out in October. So in light of the fact that everybody keeps telling us the bishops will never listen to it, never accept it, I'm just asking the bishops here to make sure you read it in October when it comes across your desk. But the thing you said that really hit me was about a national registry for priests in good standing. That's critical. That you glossed over that. I just think that's brilliant. And when I speak, I always tell lay people, if you have a good priest, somebody that you like, write your bishop. Tell them who it is, tell them why, and then at the bottom of the letter, write, please make this part of this priest's personnel file. Mm-hmm. Okay? Goes in the file. They'll have to. So make sure that you do that, and thank you. I'm going to steal your idea and run with it. Okay?
Great.
So friends, we've come to the end of the hour, and that means our only remaining responsibility is to thank our speaker once again.